In 1993, Malibu Comics launched a short-lived Street Fighter comic book series. The run was so poorly received by both fans and Capcom that Capcom demanded its cancellation after only 3 issues. This was due to some controversial decisions which we'll get into, and most likely because of an overly violent tone.
The interesting thing is, this series was also published in Brazil, but when it was cancelled in the US, the Brazilian publisher acquired the rights to it and just kept making new stories themselves.
Now, longtime viewers of my channel might be familiar with a previous video I've made in which I've talked about the Brazilian Mega Man, a Brazil-exclusive comic book series of dubious quality which became infamous for its violence, nudity, and frankly, xenophobic rants from its editors. And in fact, many Brazilian fans also requested that I take a look at this run.
So, because this series is a continuation of the Malibu series, I think it makes sense that we start with the US run first.
The first thing I've noticed about Malibu's run is the art style, namely the faces. I don't think there's a single panel where I didn't question the art direction or the characters' faces.
You say you want to be a street fighter. You're no street fighter.
I think Balrog is the only character whose face I thought was well done, but everyone else was just kind of a disaster. Anyway, one good thing that I have to say about the art is that even though the faces look off, the battles themselves do have some highlights. In the beginning, the fights have no energy from either a writing or an art standpoint. But during the second and especially the third book, we do start getting better fight panels, and in some pieces you really feel the kinetic energy associated with each strike. Anyway, the Malibu run opens with Sagat being shown a recording of his defeat at Ryu's hand at the end of the first Street Fighter tournament. This enrages Sagat, and we learn that he is in the Shadowloo headquarters with Balrog and Bison, who are recruiting him to assassinate Ryu. The issue is that they don't know where Ryu is, and so far, he's turned down all of Sagat's rematch challenges, so the plan is to get to Ryu through Ken. Meanwhile, Ryu is out training with Chun-li as we learn the two are dating. Interesting side note, the Brazilian editors admit that they hated this plot point, and that they even received a lot of angry letters and phone calls from fans regarding this relationship. I'll admit I'm not caught up on my Street Fighter lore, but I didn't find this particularly bothersome. Chun-li accuses Ryu of resting on his laurels while she's been hard at work to become stronger. She tells Ryu that she joined Interpol hoping to avenge her dad. Ryu reminisces that he misses when Chun-li was more carefree and when Ken hadn't gone Hollywood, yearning for simpler times when they all trained under Master Shenlong. Also, yes, apparently Chun-li trained with the same master as Ken and Ryu in this run. We then jump to Ken, who's filming a movie and making energy drink endorsements. He himself admits that he doesn't really like the products he endorses, and doesn't seem to care for the movie life either. But he does it for the money and glory it's given him. He also admits that he's been shirking his training and hopes to resume it once things calm down. He then goes to a party, and just as he's about to leave, he's ambushed by Balrog, who over the course of the fight keeps taunting Ken, telling him he's lost his edge. One interesting thing I've noticed is how liberal the translation was in the Brazilian version, like when they translate Dai Gaijin to go F yourself. They also add a lot more swears in the dialogue. The fight with Balrog is full of highs and lows, with some interesting and well-made shots, coupled with several other shots that feel lifeless and flat, and in some cases it's actually difficult to tell what's going on at all. Just as Ken lands his finishing blow and starts to run, Sagat shows up to finish the job. The fight with Sagat is easily the best fight in this short run. The art feels a little better than the first issue, and this is a genuinely tense battle, with Ken badly hurt but putting up a good fight, and many of the panels here are well drawn and interesting to look at. As the battle takes place, we learn M. Bison was watching it through a screen, and he straight up murders one of his own soldiers, snapping their neck. And then, as Ken loses his fight against Sagat, they cut off his scalp and send it to Ryu.
So, when I was introduced to this series by my Brazilian fans, this scene is the one they always brought up, and it's kind of why I made this video. So, I'm a little surprised to learn that this story or this scene actually came from the US writers.
Issue 3 opens up with a cover promising a thrilling fight between E. Honda and the Ferret. Ah yes, the popular Street Fighter character, the Ferret. Gee, I wonder who's gonna win that fight. Interestingly enough, in the US version, the editor's column announces that this will be the final issue. Apparently, Capcom hated the direction in which the series was going, and judging from the Brazilian editor's column, it seems that Escada, the publisher, wasn't a big fan of the story here either. Anyway, the third issue is dedicated to other characters from the games, going into detail of what their stories would have been, namely Zangief, Blanca, Honda, Dhalsim, and Guile.
So, as I'm reading this, all I can think of is... everyone here is kind of an asshole.
Like how Zangief trains by searching through Siberia for Kodiak bears and then just straight up murdering them. Or how Blanca cuts up a dude who was taunting him. Okay, I get it, the dude was taunting you, but killing him on the spot? Really? Or how about Guile? He's at a bar, some dude accidentally spills beer on him, and Guile's response is to start beating everyone up. The guy didn't even do it on purpose, it was an honest accident.
He's an asshole.
And when the bar owner starts complaining about the damages, Guile literally blows up the bar and then punches the guy.
He's an asshole.
The fight between Honda and the Ferret can be entirely skipped. The Ferret loses, shocker, I know, and says that he would like to introduce Honda to someone, but we never learn who it is. Then we jump to a new character, Nida. She's studying under Ryu and Ken's master, Shenlong, who's been poisoned by Shadaloo. And we learn that she has an axe to grind against Ryu. And then, the series ends. We're given an epilogue by the editor stating where the story would lead to next. But other than stating that Ken would have survived, not much of interest is actually told. So this is where the Malibu run ends, but a few months after the final issue launched in Brazil, Street Fighter No. 4 was out. In the editor's column we learned that Escada, the publisher, originally meant to publish the Japanese Street Fighter manga, but when negotiations fell through, they instead acquired the rights to publish their own comic book series. The first thing you'll notice about this change of fans is the art style. Street Fighter 2 is now aiming for a more anime aesthetic, though you can tell that it's clearly not made in Japan. In fact, there's something about Brazil's art during the 80s and 90s which always felt unique to me, as it was heavily influenced by Japan, but it also had its own distinctive Western flair, usually in the form of Western expressions and odd proportions. It's just something that once you've gotten used to it, you'll know it when you see it. Anyway, in issue 4, we're introduced to Fei Long's backstory and how he idolized 70s and 80s kung fu movies and became a kung fu master hoping to become the next big martial arts movie star. We also have a brief moment of M. Bison just randomly blowing up a dude's head for no other reason than to show that this comic is mature and violent. Fei Long becomes disillusioned with the movie-making world after discovering it's all just smoke and mirrors. He then comes across Chun-li, who is participating in the Street Fighter tournament against a nobody. And after she wins, he approaches her and the two start discussing their motivations for becoming fighters. She tells him about an underground fighting tournament masquerading as street fights, and Fei Long decides to register, winning his first fight against Blanca. The story concludes with Cammy being found by the British military off the coast of England. Yeah, one thing you'll notice about this run is that they love to have Cammy naked or in revealing outfits. Oh, okay, good. There's also a backup story about how Guile lost a fight against E. Honda and then goes back home to train, and he's given the keys to an experimental jet airplane. But the airplane goes so fast that he becomes paralyzed and loses control, crashing to the ground. Once he's safe, he realizes he can now use sonic boom attacks and comes back for round 2 against Honda, defeating him in the process. Interestingly enough, this side story was drawn in the old style of the comic, so it's possible that it may have been a carryover from the Malibu Comics run that Escada decided to use. In issue 5, we learn that Cammy has amnesia, but is also an expert martial artist, so she's been training with the British Special Forces before being sent to be tutored by Guile, whom she learns her special moves from. They also have her undress publicly in front of everyone because, of course she does. She also seems to flirt with Guile, though he turns her down as he's married. We then skip forward and see her defeat Zangief before noticing M. Bison standing among the crowd. She recognizes him but doesn't know from where, only that it's somehow related to her past. He tells her that if she wants to learn who she is, she needs to defeat him in the tournament. We also learn that Vega saw the fight on the news and quickly becomes infatuated with her. And now, from issue 6 and forward, we would see some pretty major changes. First off, the comic book was now renamed to Super Street Figher 2. The head writer also left the project and was replaced by a new head writer, who basically rebooted the entire series continuity. For those keeping count, that's twice this series was rebooted in just 6 issues. The new head writer, Alexandre Nagado, would also later admit in an interview that he wasn't a gamer, nor was he familiar with Street Fighter in general, and that they only had a poster with the character roster and some blurry images as reference material, so they spent some time learning the game in the arcades.
So this means the new team wasn't really a fan or even familiar with Street Fighter, and yeah, it kinda shows.
One thing I've noticed is that from this point on, the series becomes much more episodic and self-contained in nature. Suddenly, each plotline lasts about 1 to 3 issues before coming to a close and a new plotline beginning. It feels reminiscent of an 80s or 90s cartoon series, where each episode is mostly self-contained and few, if any, references to previous stories are ever made. We even see stories where the Street Fighters aren't even the main characters. For example, in issues 11 through 13, 2 godlike entities are introduced and they organize a tournament between them to decide who's next in line to rule their realm. But it all culminates in a battle between the 2 entities before it being interrupted by an elder from that very same realm. So it kinda makes the entire tournament and Capcom's fighters feel pretty pointless. You also have issues 6 through 8, which are a retelling of the Super Street Fighter 2 tournament. The problem is that condensing the entire Street Fighter 2 plot in just 3 issues makes it feel like everything is moving at a breakneck speed, and you never get the sense of what the stakes are or why you should really care. For example, issue 6 alone has 6 different fights, most of which are condensed into a single page, so it's really hard to care. Although I will say it was interesting to see how Guile, Ryu and Chun-li lost against Fei Long, Blanca and T-Hawk respectively. I gotta say, it's a nice change of pace seeing the more secondary characters coming out on top. And from this point onward, I did notice that Chun-li also started getting in on the fan service train, with half of the issues always having a couple of panels dedicated to either having Cammy or Chun-li baiting, nearly nude, or strongly implying it. Okay. But anyway, long story short, Guile, Ryu and Chun-li go to Thailand and sneak onto the Shadaloo base and attack M. Bison, who is aided by Balrog, Vega and Sagat. And eventually the other tournament fighters join the fight on the side of our heroes. M. Bison and his warriors are defeated, the Shadaloo base is destroyed, and Vega needs to learn about consent. Guile then proposes that our heroes join up and form a task force to stop evil around the world, which is what kickstarts the episodic nature of the rest of this series.
So, past this stage, it's a little difficult to care about the story anymore, so I'm just gonna jump around the various plot arcs.
Almost every story is rushed and is given very little time to mature. And from this point on, we revert to the old Guile, Ryu, Ken, Chun-li and Cammy combo, with the rest of the cast being given little to no screen time. It's especially bad if you're a fan of characters like Dalsim, Zangief or DJ.
What's a Dawson? Oh!
But regardless, we'll run through the remaining plot arcs very quickly. Issues 9 and 10 have Cammy and Chun-li team up to track down and stop a shape-shifting assassin who can transform into any of the Street Fighter characters. So basically, it's Street Fighter's take on Shang Tsung, except the second part of the issue seems uniquely tailored towards fan service, with not 1, but 2 shower scenes, culminating in a battle against the assassin in which Chun-li is in her underwear and Cammy is only wearing a towel. Also, there are a lot of close-up shots of their feet. I'm just saying. Issues 11 through 13 is the interdimensional tournament we discussed before, in which our main cast don't even feel like they belong in this story. Issues 14 to 16 are about how Shadaloo is rebuilding itself under Sagat's leadership. They kidnap Guile with the purpose of enacting revenge, while the main cast sets out to save him. It's also later revealed that M. Bison is still alive, though Sagat and his crew don't take kindly to this, who now view M. Bison as a traitor who left them to die when the first Shadaloo base was destroyed. In the end, Sagat, Vega and Balrog are defeated while M. Bison escapes, claiming he's now more powerful than ever. Interestingly enough, from issues 14 onwards, each release contains more pages, but rather than being used to give the main story some much needed breathing room, they're used towards adding backup standalone stories, in this case of Dalsim, Zangief, and Blanca. Also interesting is that from this point onward, the art got a major upgrade. If you told me that this was an official release from Japan, I would have believed you, because the artists got the art style down to an almost perfect state. In issue 17, Chun-li and Cammy go to a high-stakes casino to stop a drug lord, but Chun-li is kidnapped and held hostage. Ken was also spending some time there before joining Cammy to save Chun-li and stop the drug lord. During the mission debrief, Chun-li confesses her love for Guile and kisses him, which I'm not actually sure if he's married in this continuity or not, and they don't even bring up his marriage, so I don't know. Kinda weird how they were pairing up Guile with Cammy in the previous continuity and now they're switching it to Chun-li. On the next issue, Guile and Chun-li go on a vacation but run into some triad shenanigans, and they need to put a stop to that. They also run into T-Hawk, who doesn't do much to be honest. And then we have the final arc, the Akuma storyline, which introduces characters from the Alpha series, including fan favorite Sakura, who opens the issue with an upskirt panty shot. Of course. Anyway, in this arc we find Ryu training Sakura, and we see a quick introduction of various new characters in several quick succession battles, in which Akuma defeats Dalsim, while Ryu and Ken defeat Soram and Drillento. We learn that Akuma has been traveling around the world defeating the various Street Fighters, including Balrog and Vega, all while Rose and Dan are secretly spying on him. Also, quick note, yes, Dan is actually a good fighter in this continuity, which is pretty funny if you know anything about Dan. Rose meets up with Guile, who tells him about Akuma, and how he's going to meet up with Gan to train under him. Akuma starts training under Gan when suddenly Ryu bursts in, challenging Akuma to a fight, and then the series ends. Yes, that's right, the comic series is finally cancelled and the Akuma arc remains unresolved to this day, though some of the art on the next issue was penciled and shared by the series creators years later on their Facebook pages. There was also a special issue published between issues 13 and 14, which tells 3 independent stories that fall outside of the main continuity.
So overall, the Brazilian Street Fighter comic book series is... it's fine. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just fine.
The art was a bit rough at first, but that got improved eventually. My main issue is the plot, which never really grabbed me. The rivalry between Ken and Ryu also seems to have been put in the back burner. But really, the main problem here is that each arc gets resolved too quickly. The story is never given enough time to build proper tension. You kind of already know how most battles will play out, or how each character fits into the overall plot before it even begins. In the end, this makes the story feel a little by the numbers. Ironically, the fact that it's not balls-to-the-wall insane like the Brazilian Mega Man series kind of makes this one forgettable. I mean, sure, there's some violence and a lot of fan service, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty harmless and nowhere near as insane as the Brazilian Mega Man series. Unfortunately though, unless you speak Portuguese, there's no way you can really read these. Additionally, finding this series online is way more difficult than it should be. I only found these issues because someone uploaded them onto their Google Drive and left a comment on Reddit. So yeah, it's not easy to find. And most likely not really worth tracking down either. But hey, in the end, for better or worse, this was an official Capcom licensed series, and it's an interesting look at an alternate universe rendition of Street Fighter. Hey everyone, thank you for watching SteelKid's Retro Corner. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell and share this video. All that fun social media stuff. And you can also support me on Patreon. It may not seem like it, but even $1 is a really big help in keeping the channel going. I would also like to thank my newest Patreon supporters, Draco Montague, Strider, Binary Luke, and Stefan Octavian Eremia. Thank you for helping make this channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!
It's the most lethal G.I. Joe team yet! Capcom Street Fighter 2!
No way!
Wait! There's Guile, Ryu, Zangief, Blanca, and Dalsin.
What's a Dawson? Oh,
Some with real ninja moves.
but Cobra's got Street Fighters too!
Vega, Sagat, Balrog.
And me, El Bison!
They look unbeatable. You know them, you love them.
So correcto!
Capcom Street Fighter 2 figures each sold separately.
Oh, I like them!